Joining me now is the one and only Mish, Chief Strategist of MarketGauge.com. All right, Mish, it's good to see you. I know you talked to my colleagues here on our various shows. I was so happy to see that I get to talk with you today. All right, so I know you're really paying attention to small caps lately. They finally joined the party. We've seen stocks overall powering to new highs. Talk to me first before we jump into where things stand with small caps. How much longer do you see this bull market having legs?
Well, instead of answering the question directly like that, I like to say when you cross the street, you want to look both ways. So what are the possible things that could cause the market to sell off? I think the number one thing I'm looking at right now is really, interestingly enough, the regional bank sector. And back in 2023, we had that flash crash in March when there was credit defaults. And we do not see that area participating the way we're seeing, let's say, in big banks. So those would be the small, more rural type of banks. And if you want to look at an ETF, KRE, if that starts to break down, and I can give you a number on that, 64, that might be a little bit of a warning. The second warning, of course, would be what happens with the yields here, because everybody anticipated that the yields would fall, and instead they've risen. And then, of course, we have all the other fun stuff to look at. Well, the government shut down, the debt rising, geopolitical concerns. Those are always in the background. But what you really want to see right now, we'll start with small caps, is for those to stay in the game. It's possible, I'm not saying it's probable, but it's possible that we may have seen triple tops, because this area of the Russells, we were there in 21, 24, and now here, we need to get through it to really keep the legs going.
How important is that move in small caps for essentially confirming the momentum is on the side of the bulls?
Well, I think it's extremely important. Listen, we can all sit here and argue all day about tech and AI and growth and, of course, the thematics of space and robotics and quantum computing, et cetera. But if we're really going to see confidence in the plans that we've had with tariffs, reshoring, and a rebuilding of made in USA, that's where the small caps have to stay in the game. Otherwise, what happens is growth continues to go, looks behind, sees the rest of the markets not following, and then starts to fall off. And then the final thing, of course, would be really the consumer has to stay in the game as well.
The consumer has to stay in the game, obviously, here in the U.S. But, I mean, in some ways, it looks like the consumer is staying in the game. When we look at some of the retail sales data that we had recently, there was some surprising strength there. Is there anything that's worrying you or risk factor that you're paying attention to as it relates to the consumer and retail?
Well, yes, because a lot of that number were the wealthiest people doing the bulk of the buying. We know that there are a lot of people still struggling. But I guess the biggest concern for the retailers right now would be, A, if we cannot get those interest rates under control, B, if the dollar, which got a little bit of a bounce last week, so that's good, but if it starts its free fall, and C, of course, would be inflation, which right now, the numbers don't look that bad, but we're always watching oil and gas, things that could be impacted from geopolitical concerns.
Okay, so let's talk. I'm curious about what sectors you're constructive on through the balance of this year.
Well, in terms of the whole growth sector, I always like to look at the things that drive it at this point. And so for me, I'm still really focused on the energy space. We know that uranium had a great move last week, but that's still somewhat out a few years in terms of it being a practical solution for generating the power that we need. And we've seen electricity prices go through the roof. So I'm also looking, I've been sort of focused, maybe a little obsessed, on natural gas being so cheap here, because we really have it in abundance in one level, but on the other level, we export a lot of it. So I want to see those prices potentially go up. I'm looking there. I'm also looking, of course, at things like IBM and Salesforce and some of the areas that more infrastructure based for not just blockchain, but AI in itself. We're in some of the higher flyers. I know Micron reports this week. I keep my eyes there. And then outside of that, I like things like Chemours. People don't talk about companies like this, but they actually make the coding for chips. That CC would be the symbol. Stratus has had a nice move on Friday. I want to see what happens with that. Outside of that, I'm still into my vanity trade, Diane.
About your vanity trade. I wanted to see how that was doing, and especially given the news this morning that we have with Pfizer and Metsera acquiring it because they want to obviously get in, and Pfizer hasn't been able to get into the same degree the weight loss, addressing weight loss in the same way Novo and Eli Lilly has done. So where do you stand? What's your pick within the vanity trade now?
Well, of the drug companies right now, I'm more interested in Novo Nordisk. I think as long as it can really hold up here above 50, it still looks good. But this is what's going to happen. You're going to get competition. So what I'm more interested in is as we get more affordable drugs for people to use, and again, 40% obesity rate's pretty high. As that starts to reverse, which I believe it will, what will people going to buy? So that's why we've seen Elf flying and Ulta flying. But even outside of that, I'm looking at things like I mentioned Stitch Fix before, reports this week, but that's a company that could really benefit. That was $113 and it's trading just about $6 right now. So, that's kind of Match.com, Bumble, anything that people who all of a sudden feel good about themselves after years of having struggles, what are they going to consume? And that's what I'm still researching. But I think it's an emerging market.
All right, Mish, we'll leave our conversation there for today. That's Mish Schneider, Chief Strategist, MarketGauge.com.